Welcome, everyone. Today we are talking about building high performing teams. And with me is a former colleague of mine, Kristine Engman, to help us talk about this. So, both an expert, I would say, I will say, an expert in building high performing teams as a leader herself and likely a consultant now. And so, welcome, Kristine. I'm so glad you agreed to be here today.
Thanks for inviting me, Kent. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Well, let's start with this. I think the listeners love to hear how people landed in doing what they're doing today. So I'd love to hear your career arc before we get into our conversation.
Absolutely. So I feel like most of my career and really life has been a lot of following my gut, following what I'm good at, and trusting myself enough to take the next step or leap and being okay with that journey and not knowing what the next thing is. So I started my career out of college with Cargill. So I'm from a small town in northern Minnesota, Virginia, Minnesota. Went to college at Bemidji State, was a student athlete. I played volleyball there, went to be a math teacher. Decided that I did not enjoy going to be a math teacher and took an accounting class for fun, fell into the business world. Cargill came to recruit at Bemidji State. I got one of the two internships and decided to say yes to a company, which it's sad to say I had never heard of. And they're like the largest privately owned company in the world. But I obviously lived a sheltered life. So I said yes.
Yeah.
And I initially was supposed to be an accountant for my internship. And 2 weeks before I started, one of their credit analysts for the energy group left. And so someone brilliant said, let's just have the intern do it. So instead of doing what interns do, which is getting put on projects, I was doing like a full-time job as a credit analyst seated on the center of the trade floor in energy. And maybe to back up for a second, when I was taking accounting classes and majoring in accounting, all I knew were the things I didn't want to do in accounting. I didn't want to be in private accounting. I didn't want to be in audit. I didn't want to do people's taxes. And it wasn't until the moment where I was a credit analyst in the center of the trade floor that I had the light bulb moment, I want to be a trader. And so then from there, I was hired full-time as an accountant in Cargill's Energy Group. And I told my manager like 2 weeks in that I want to be a trader and I will do this job to the best of my ability, but can you help me, or what are the things that I should do to become a trader? And so I spent a lot of time learning about what the traders were doing, getting on projects that involved myself with the traders. And a year after I started, entry-level real-time energy position opened up in trading. And that was the probably second big leap that I had, where I went into a space that was very unknown. There wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. I was one of the only females. I was one of the youngest real-time traders in the country. And I loved every minute of it. I loved the challenge. I loved that the harder I worked, the more money I was making for the company when I was trading. And I just really enjoyed it. And then from there, I spent the next 10 years in the energy trading business, working my way up to a day trader and then a term trader and managing schedulers and different teams. And that's sort of important when you think about my journey as a manager and a leader. Those first 10 years, as I was taking on more and more responsibility with people, I was also coming from a subject matter expert in things that they were doing. And so my leadership style and like how I was managing was also coming from, I know how to do your jobs. I've done your jobs. And so I felt very confident in managing and leading people. And then I took a step out of trading for a year and worked with the M&A team to acquire some investment bank physical books for Cargill as the lead trader on those projects. And then I took a bigger leap. So I had decided that I really wanted to get into more of the core of what Cargill was known for, which was more agriculture food space. And so I took a big leap into what was the corn milling businesses. And I was responsible for all of the physical origination of corn into all of our assets in North America. And then I was also responsible for trading the slate for Cargill and responsible for helping our consumer customers manage their price risk. I was in that role for about 3.5 years, and that was like being thrown into the deep end and not knowing how to swim because I
Mhm.
had no expertise in agriculture or food. Everybody that was on my team, I was the first time I was managing people that were not in my physical location and
Yeah.
managing managers. And so it really made me think about how to be successful as a manager and probably some of the things we'll talk about later as in leadership.
Yeah.
And then the last step in my Cargill career was I moved over to the oil space. So I was I was the North America trading lead for veg oils and fats. And then after a few years, was asked to take the global lead. So I was the global
Mhm.
trading and risk management director for oils and fats for the food, feed, and fuel businesses. And then I took a big step out of corporate America. So about
Another leap.
a big leap. This was like the leap to the unknown. All the other leaps, you could sort of see it and you talk to people. This leap was I think that I need to take a step out of the corporate world for
Mhm.
both professional and personal reasons. On the professional side, I was traveling a lot. I was doing a lot of things. I was enjoying it. I could have seen myself in the corporate world for another 20 years, and maybe I will go back there. But
Mhm.
on the personal side, I also needed a little bit more flexibility with where my family was at that stage. And I felt like it was the perfect time for me to take a bigger leap and go run after some of the things that I hadn't gotten to run after maybe as hard
Mhm.
when I was in the corporate world. And so for a while, I just enjoyed some family time. And then I actually said yes to a podcast as a favor to another colleague. And that kickstarted my consulting career. And I
Cool.
have been doing that for the last 9 months. So, consulting around business strategy, leadership, primarily in like any businesses that have physical commodities, since that's the
Mhm.
bulk of my background, but then also doing some career coaching, which is some of my favorite things to do.
Cool. So primarily coaching and consulting. You said business strategy, and coaching in commodity trading businesses.
Yes, or
Or
businesses
or did
that
I oversimplify it?
have a commodity component to their
Yeah.
business. Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Um, Love it. And I think there's a clear arc in here around, and I think you said it right at the beginning, and I'll put it in my words, which is like, don't create a plan and hold too tight to it, right? It sounds like you had a number of opportunities that maybe had you created the long-term career plan for yourself that you wouldn't have put on that map. Would you agree? Like, so kind of being open to what the possibilities might be and taking those leaps is a
Yeah,
big part of
absolutely. And it's interesting. I a few months ago, I got to go and explain to a bunch of eighth grade middle schoolers what I do, and as part of like their career day, and they bring in professionals. And I, I think there's a lot of pressure for people to like pick a path and decide
Yeah.
and know what you want to do. And I was there telling them like it's okay that you don't know what you want to do or what profession or like what specific jobs you want to do.
Mhm.
For me, it's been way more about like what are things that I really are interesting to me that I'm really good at that match well with like what I bring to the
Mhm.
table. Where do I want to be spending my time? And being okay with like the unknown and exactly what that looks like. Because no, I would not have put any of those jobs on the table because I didn't really know they existed,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, and I think a common thing that's happening, it happens in bursts, right? I think we're in one right now where some of the jobs don't. Not only did you not know that they existed, but they didn't exist,
Right.
right? 2 years ago, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And
So
sometimes listening to people that see things in you that you don't see. So like when I took
Right.
that step out of trading for a year and
Hmm.
worked with like on this big project with the strategy team, I
Hmm.
really didn't want to do that. Like I kept seeking out people that I thought would have the same view as me, like don't leave trading, you shouldn't leave trading. And most people, especially the ones that were in like my inner circle of like trust that I really respected, were like, you would be really good at this. This would be really
Hmm.
good for you. It would stretch you in a different way. And they were totally right. So I also think it's about like, listening to others about what they see in you and what you can bring to the table, especially if it's not maybe a role that you would have otherwise looked at.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That takes a lot of, maybe not a lot, but it takes leaders also seeing that in you and making that case on your behalf in rooms you're not in, but also help trying to make that case to you as well.
Yeah. But I think they have to know you to be able to do it, which is really important, right?
Yeah. 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 There's something I want before we get into our topic of high performance teams or high performing
Yeah.
teams. You had talked about two critical sort of leadership experiences. One where you were leading your first leadership experience, leading the team or a team where you had that exact expertise, and then later when you were managing managers, it was not your area of expertise. And
Mhm.
I talk about this in my consulting often, right? Because I think in the one bucket of managing where you have your expertise, one of the biggest challenges for leaders is letting go of how you would have done things, and right, and sort of almost letting go of your expertise. But then there's the challenge when you're managing in an area that you don't have the expertise, which is you almost need to work on that early so that you can be comfortable with it later.
Mhm.
And right, that you're really leaning on the expertise of your team, and like, how do I need to manage in this way where I don't have the expertise and the team does, and how do I provide leadership and guidance when I don't know the how of the work exactly, or not, all the particulars. So I just was curious what your take on either or both of those ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of leaders will find themselves in both situations over time. And I don't know if it's better to be in one versus the other first. I was
Yeah.
smiling as you were talking about the leading from expertise and can be dangerous if you're trying to get people to do things the way that you did them. And I was thinking about when I was in energy, and I have always, probably because I was accounting major, I've always like
Mhm.
loved spreadsheets and order and like putting in formulas and total like nerdy stuff, right? And I had a scheduler who had always like handwritten out his schedules. It was like his process. And I really, really, really tried to get him to switch to spreadsheets and like look at my way. And it's so much better and it's quicker and more efficient. And we can share it. And he was just really comfortable with the way that he operated and was actually just as efficient for him to do it that way. And I
Mhm.
realized it wasn't something that I needed to change to have an excellent result, but it took me a while. I was a fairly new manager at the time. And so I think you can get into the situation where you're trying to force, your ways of doing things on
Mhm.
others when maybe it wouldn't make a material difference. But I do
Right.
feel like when you step into a role where you're leading in an area where you have like subject matter expertise and or you've done some of those jobs before, there's a level of comfort there.
Right.
Think it's almost you really need to, establish, and push yourself as a leader and a manager to not sort of be comfortable in that and forget all the other important parts about leadership.
Right.
Feel like when you're in an area where when you're put into an area where you don't have subject matter expertise or you haven't done some of those roles before or you really don't know a lot,
Mhm.
I think it really pushes you to bring out all of those other areas that make, in my opinion, great leaders and managers because you have to rely on them because you truly don't have the subject matter expertise to sort of fall back and be comfortable in. And so,
Mhm.
that comes to things like really listening to others and getting to know, what they do, but not in the level of detail that you would otherwise have if you have the subject matter expertise, and trusting that they're
Yeah.
going to, do their jobs. And it's just a very different way, but I think it brings out the the qualities and leadership that you truly have. And it's a super, I would say, uncomfortable but amazing like experience to also get to know who you really are as a leader when you're put in those situations.
Yeah. 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 And there's almost a, when you're managing individual contributors, that depending, I guess, on their career level, right? Like there is almost a requirement that you know how to do the job, especially if it's people who are early in career and learning the job themselves. And then which, naturally flows when you're in a higher level role, the people under you have more tenure and experience. And so the level of hands-on that presumably, or hopefully the level of hands-on that immediate team needs is less, right? Um, let's segue into high performing teams, right? So not every team is high performing. I think it gets a lot of talk, right? In some of the HR space is, and the leadership and coaching space is building high performing teams. So talk to me a little bit about your experience and thinking around building a high performing team.
Yeah. I've come into a few teams where they weren't maybe coming off of their best year or performance. So I've got some direct experience with it. And it became a little bit of my brand and why I moved through different businesses in Cargill, because I had been able to have some success in that space. And I think it was because of that experience of getting into the deep end and not knowing how to swim and really trying to figure it out. For me, one of the biggest things is like truly getting to know your direct reports, because
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, people by far, I mean, it's very cliche to say it, but they're totally your biggest asset. And if you don't take the time when you are coming into a new team to get to know
Mm-hmm.
those individuals, both, I would say both directly on your team or people that you're going to work with that aren't maybe
Yeah.
direct reports, but are people you're going to work with on a regular basis. I
Mm-hmm.
think it sets the course for maybe like more of a hierarchy, or maybe not the best team environment,
Mm-hmm.
or it can lead to feelings of like, this person doesn't really care about me. They care about more about themselves or their job. And so I think the first thing for me for building high performing teams is like really getting to know the immediate people you're going to be working with and building that relationship. I think that is super,
Mm-hmm.
super key. I would say the next thing that I have done when I sit down with those people is ask them about the thing that they hate most about their job and the thing that they love the most. And if there was one thing that they could change, what would it be?
Yeah.
Because I think it's super important to know those things. And
Mm-hmm.
as you start to, build a strategy or, really work towards a team goal, I think it's super important to know like what's going on in your team's minds. Like, what are the things they really hate about their jobs, and be thinking about like,
Yeah.
is this something that we could be, maybe something that somebody on your team hates, somebody else really likes doing. Spreadsheets is a good example. Everybody loves spreadsheets. And so there's just things like that I think
Yeah.
getting to know people sets the course. And then I think, really having a strategy or a vision or a short-term goal or whatever that has come from like also your team's thoughts or
Mm-hmm.
ideas or input is important, because they're going to work a heck of a lot harder and you're going to help bring out the best when they truly feel like they've had some sort of a input.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like their idea and it doesn't end up on the final page, the fact that you've like listened, or that they've felt like they have had an input and that they're going to be put in a position to succeed, I think that's important for high performing teams. I'm actually a big believer in stretch goals. So I actually like to give goals or targets, or I would say come up with them as a team, that are
Mm-hmm.
on the upper end of what people think that they can achieve,
Yeah.
because it's really powerful when you can achieve those goals. And it's really powerful when the entire team believes that they truly have a part in achieving it. Um, and then I think just investing in people and really giving them that personal development to grow
Hmm.
and being okay with the fact that they have their own ambitions and goals too that may or may not align with the team, which sort of goes back to step one, having
Yeah.
that relationship. So I think some of those like building blocks of like the team dynamic are super key to the overall success of building a high performing team.
Yeah. I love it. You've hit on a massive interest area of mine, which is um, how leaders enter into a team, right? And I think a particular area of interest for me is internal promotions, right? Because now a lot of what you said, I would say equally pertains to a leader coming in from outside the organization, right? I don't think anything you said um, doesn't apply to both, right? If you've been promoted into a leadership role internally, or if you're coming in from the outside. Um, so I want to like wheel back and like pick into some of these a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because I think um, you've mapped out a really, arguably you've mapped out like a really great, what's the first 60, 90 day, or even first 6 months or year kind of approach to onboarding onto a team and really establishing yourself as the leader. And you had talked about, the very first thing you talked about was getting to know both your team members and maybe your cross-functional partners,
Mhm.
right? Um, so talk to me a little bit about when you are getting to know your team members, what does that look like to you, right? Because I think you talked a bit about the personal relationship, but I think there was also something you said in the first part of our call. I'm going to put it in my own words now, which is there's an element of, and you said a little bit of it here too, which is an element of like, what do you like about your job? What do you not? My guess, knowing you, is there's a bit of career conversation in there as well. Like, where does this person want to be?
Yep.
So go just a little deeper there for us.
Yeah, for sure. So there's definitely an element of like their career, short, medium, long term. And
Mm-hmm.
again, as I said earlier, you don't need to know what your next job is, but I want to know what their aspirations are. Some people really love being a subject matter expert and continuing to be deep in that knowledge and team and
Mm-hmm.
want to stay in the role that they're in or the team that they're in. Totally okay. Other people have ambitions to like get a bunch of different experiences or really climb the ladder, and that's great too. I think it's important though to have those conversations to make sure that when you're talking about development and you're thinking about development of your team, that you're able to find those areas that are good for the whole team, but then also look for specific development for the individuals on your team or
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, right? If somebody wants to be in my role in the
Mm-hmm.
future, right, then I'm going to be looking to give them opportunities to like speak at a conference or attend something that I should be attending, but I can't because I have a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's just really important to have those conversations on the career. I also didn't touch on just an overall inventory of what are they responsible for, what do they think that they are measured against performance wise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times I've come into roles and those two things do not match what I was told from either the outgoing manager or from what I expected, or don't at all match what their prior year performance review was, or maybe the compensation incentive portion that they got. And so I think it's also really important to do an inventory of like, what do they think they're responsible for? What do they like to, how do they like to operate? Some people, really want a high level of autonomy. Others might like a little bit more direction or approval, and also tell them that what your typical leadership style is.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it doesn't match from what they were used to, that also can be a conflict. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty open ended and wide arching, and I try to hit it all in the first couple of conversations. But to your other point on 30, 60, 90
Yeah.
days, it's usually like a 90-day roadmap that I have in my head of
Mm-hmm.
from entry to all right, I feel like we're in a good position to really, really be rolling now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you also mentioned peers, right? Which I've found in some of my coaching, Peers with the best of intention by the leader, the incoming leader, the best of intention to onboard, hit the ground running, keep the team moving, can unintentionally neglect peer relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And not even just right away, but even over the course of time, to where, all right, now your team is humming and you're working on something with your peer group under your leader, and or something that affects the entire area of your leader's responsibility. And now you're suddenly in this position where you need to get buy-in, and all the time that probably should have been spent also getting to know your peers and building those relationships, which lays the foundation for influence, I mean, was missed, right? And now you're playing catch up, and or you're hitting resistance that you wouldn't have expected, right? So I loved hearing that. One of the first things that you work on too is getting to know those peers, right? That cross functional support.
Oh yeah, and I have so many great stories about that. But like one of my favorites is, and I do that at the same time I'm getting to know my team. So to your point, I'm not waiting,
Yeah.
because your peers, right? Like you are all also a team,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you guys also have a manager that's managing all of you,
Right.
and is probably also trying to bring you together. But the higher up you go, the less of that
Mm-hmm.
is, and the more expectation is that you're just doing those things on your own. But you also have goals for the business that you're operating in, and I just feel like it makes it so much easier when you're in all of these leadership meetings with all the other cross-functional partners, and everybody's got their own agenda or view, if you understand where they're coming from. It's sort of the same
Mm-hmm.
thing. And that they understand where you're coming from and how you're spending your time, because then everyone feels like less of a threat and
Mm-hmm.
more of a partner. And I feel like the goal should be that you all feel like partners in like moving the business forward and in each other's journeys, and having a support versus like a threat. And so I came to a business and I had sat down with the R&D lead. And so again, a lot of the businesses I've been in are processing businesses. And so we had R&D, which is like, there is not a daily, weekly, or sometimes even monthly interaction with trading and R&D. There's just not a natural, it's not, supply chain. Yes, there's going to be daily interactions, and operations team
Mm-hmm.
daily interactions, and finance accounting teams daily interactions. R&D, not a daily interaction. And so I set up a meeting with him and I said, why don't I come to the R&D space, which was a different building in a different city. And so I did that. And his first comment was, no trading leader has ever come here. And I think that immediately made him feel like, I really do care about R&D. I care about the relationship with you. I want to understand where you're coming from, so that I also can help understand what you're trying to do. And if I can be an ally in helping you get some things achieved from that space, it's going to make us all better. Right. And I just thought that was really cool, but also important. So HR is a big one, right? Because it's really hard to build a relationship with HR when you're trying to ask for more money for your team. That's not a good time to start building the relationship. It's also
Right.
not a good time if you have to make a hard decision with a team member that maybe isn't performing. Also not a good time to start the relationship with HR, right?
Yeah.
So I think some of it's almost more important to build the relationships with your peers that you don't have the daily interaction with.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, you're all trying to achieve some business goal, and that's super important.
Yeah. Suddenly you're going to need them for something. And if they're like, who are you? Right. Like, why would they give you the benefit of the doubt? And, there's just so much more groundwork that has to be laid.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me, how else, when you think about high performing teams, and either how you have built high performing teams or how you're consulting folks now in terms of building high performing teams, what else do you focus on?
I focus on, and this probably sounds cliche because I trading background, but I do focus on risk appetite and culture in the business, because I think underlying a lot of what's going on teams is
Mhm.
people's different tolerances for risk taking in a business,
Yeah.
which can lead to a lot of like tug of war type scenarios when you're
Mhm.
trying to accelerate a business.
I love it. So how do you apply that out of the trading world? I think I see where you're going, but help our audience here or slash me.
Yeah. So let's say that we're in a processing business and we have an aspiration to grow our bottom line by like 20%.
Hmm.
Okay. And then we've got all these projects and they've got different ROIs, and we're looking at, how the business is running and the costs, because you're either going to grow your top line
Yep.
or you're going to cut costs, right? And so I like to look at both.
Hmm.
Um and you might find that a bunch of these projects are not moving forward in gates because either um there's been too many people that have voted no because you have to invest a lot of capital, and people feel that is going to detract from the goal of growing the bottom line by 20% because now we're investing more money. So that's actually going to make the hurdle to achieve our goal even further. And that usually
Hmm.
stems from, well, they don't have a great appetite for risk, or they don't understand sort of the returns and the depths of the project. So that could be one. A lot of times there's, um, you know, if you don't have a great idea of what's going on with the different members of your team, there's a lot of safety in like owning your space and not making a lot
Hmm.
of changes. So I've seen where you're holding on to like a lot of volume in storage so you don't ever run out of product to make whatever you're making, because there's a metric for the ops person that you're not going to run out of product. And so if you're measured by you're not going to run out of product, you're going to hold a lot of excess product, but that might be costing the business a lot of money, um, because the appetite to run leaner isn't there because there's a metric for the person that they need to achieve, which is I don't ever want to run out of product because then that's going to look negative on my review, or I don't have the risk appetite to run with only 10% safety stock. I only feel comfortable with 50. And so I think sometimes in looking at businesses is really figuring out not only like the risk appetite for different areas, top line and bottom line, but also, or top line and expenses, but then also, and I touched on it, looking at what is the measures of success for the individual like departments, because oftentimes they can come in conflict, and it's a good
Yeah.
discussion to have as a leadership team, and maybe realigning, what people are measured on, especially at that leadership level, which can then, I think transform some of the conversations.
Mm. I feel like I've run into that a little bit, very peripherally, not directly myself, with R&D cost, for example, right? We have what we do today and how we do it today, and those top line and bottom line projections we have today. And an easy thing for us to look at cutting, for example, is R&D, because it can be seen in the short term as simply a cost.
Yep.
Um, Let alone the area of HR leadership development. That's always an easy, look as a cost, but I'll pick on something more business related.
But I think that's a good one too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think a lot of businesses go through this cost cutting, and yes, you outlined some of the departments that maybe are first on the chopping block, but often those are the departments, like in the case of R&D, right? They're going to be generating that future growth.
Mhm. Yep.
And so you've just sort of lopped off one of your main necessities for growing your
Yeah.
top line. And
Yeah.
HR or other maybe like supporting functions,
Yeah.
that to me, I think really becomes detrimental to the broader business, because you're losing resources that are supporting like leadership and managers. You're losing resources that can help support and develop the people, which I already said are your most important asset. So I almost like to flip it on its head and say like those should be the last things that we should be
Mhm.
looking at to cut. And we should be having different discussions about growth and alignment of, goals and view of the business and risk appetite, um, in order to achieve success. I think another one we didn't talk about is
Mhm.
short term versus long term incentives, because a lot of incentives are on the year, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you perform on this year? And obviously, those are necessary,
Mhm.
but it also can drive different behaviors when you're looking at long term investments, or R&D costs today that are going to pay off in 3 to 5 years. And so I've always been a huge advocate for looking at how do you have incentives that not only incent short term, like 1 year performance, but
Yeah.
also drive that top line growth over time.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that you're on the outside, right? Because I would say, having been at Cargill myself, so I've worked at two different private companies and two different public companies in my career. And there is a bit of a difference, right? When it comes to um, your ability to think longer term in a private company compared to a public
Sure.
company. Um, my experience in a couple of public companies was like sprint, sprint, rush, rush. Everybody pause for earnings release. Whatever you're doing, just put it on hold. Earnings release comes out, and if that's good, it's continue forward. And if it's not great, it's everybody pivot 90 degrees and run in a new direction. So, what's been your experience now that you're on the outside consulting with public versus private?
I think you're pretty spot on, but
Yeah,
I do think that it's also all about good leadership, because what how you explain short-term earnings in the public side, um,
yeah,
I think has a lot to do with shareholder confidence,
hmm,
and the conversations that you're having internally about how you're going to grow short-term and long-term, right, can still very much be growth driven and separate from those short-term earnings. But absolutely, there's a huge consideration for making sure that you're meeting stakeholder expectations, because at the end of the day they're driving your share price, and that's
yeah,
a big portion of it. But I think, like, really good leaders are able to instill that confidence in shareholders and talk about the investments that they're making in a strategic way. And I think that the more that they understand the drivers of the business, the more that they can give that confidence and that realistic view.
hmm,
um, because at the end of the day, most people are investing in companies that they believe in, and aren't,
yeah,
I mean, that's the majority of those shareholders, right? And
hmm,
you're going to have the investors that are just, short-term opportunistic. And so those you almost have to have a little bit of a transient view on, and
yeah,
look at more the long term, who's really, you know, at the end of the day, if your company isn't growing long term, you're not going to be relevant either. So you can't completely ignore
right,
the long term.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So many, I think, good nuggets in here already today for leaders and those who support leaders. But I'm gonna force us into our third section of the of the podcast either way. So I asked you to prepare a couple of pieces of practical advice. So starting with leaders, what's your practical advice today? Something leaders can start thinking about or doing immediately.
We talked a little bit or touched on them. Before I get into my five,
Yeah.
the biggest thing for me is like showing up as authentically
Mm,
you, which is, I know a lot of people say it. I think it's easier to say than do. Um,
right.
I think being vulnerable as a leader is one of the most powerful things you can do. And I think a lot of times, um, you don't necessarily get that from leaders.
Yeah.
I feel like people are human too.
Right.
Um, and so showing a little bit of vulnerability at times, I think is okay and good.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I think there's a big difference, right, between being vulnerable and being messy,
right. Oh, for
right?
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. But
And I think that's where people get it wrong. If they get it wrong, it's tipping. tipping the scale into messy.
Yes, don't show up every day like, oh my gosh, I'm so crazy busy and I'm always late and all these things are going on in emotion on my sleeve.
Yeah.
No, but you can be very relatable human you, right?
Yeah.
While still showing up as a leader. Because sometimes at the end, there are expectations of leaders and how you present yourself and the things that you say, maybe in town halls, and but that doesn't mean that you can't be approachable and relatable.
Right.
Which sort of goes to my first piece of advice, which is
Hmm.
connect with people. And in order to
Yeah.
connect with people, you have to be available. One of the things that I find is really hard is when you're trying to talk to a manager or a leader about something and they don't have time.
Hmm.
And granted, everyone is really busy. But I feel like if you truly value your team
Hmm.
and you know that they're coming to you for a very important reason, right?
Right.
I just operate on the need to know basis, right? If you feel like there's something that I need to know or you need input on right now, absolutely connect with me. But otherwise, like we've already defined your level of autonomy, so just run. Um,
Yeah.
but then you need to be available. It's not that hard to be available for 5
Yeah.
minutes. Um,
Yeah.
and I think,
Multitasking has gotten worse though, don't you think? Right. Like I think I remember giving the advice years ago before everything was on Zoom and Teams and all that of like, if someone stops in your office, like Control Alt Delete, lock your computer and give them your
yeah,
attention. And now that we're doing it on Zoom and Teams, that's harder. That's harder to accomplish virtually, right? But I would say I give the same advice too, which is like try to shut down Outlook or your other instant messages or whatever. Give this person your full attention.
well, and I would have like office time a couple times a week that I would set up specifically that my team would know about. So if it was something that could wait until that time,
Mhm.
they knew that I was gonna like I strategically had it blocked. I'm not gonna have a meeting during this time.
Yeah,
Um,
nice.
but you know what? Actually, AI is helping make some of these meetings that we are like participants or attendees,
Mhm.
maybe not
Mm,
active participants.
yeah,
Just send your AI bot to the
meeting notes.
for the
Yeah.
5 minutes that you need to like be off of camera because there's
Mhm.
30 people on it so that you can go have the connection. And I know it's
Right.
easier said than done, but I
Yeah.
there's time and
Yeah.
place, right?
So,
Um,
what's your? I'm gonna move us forward a little here. What's your advice for? And I always say supporters of leaders, right? So that could be HR,
yeah.
talent, leadership, or it could be senior leaders, right? They are supporting leaders as well. So, what's your advice for those who support leaders?
Hmm, I would just say ask them what they need.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes they just need to vent, honestly, right?
yeah.
Like a lot of times I would tell something to HR and they would think that I needed them to do something. And in
Oh,
reality, I just needed
yeah.
a 2-minute vent for somebody to listen. So sometimes you just need to show up to like listen or ask what they need. Um,
Right.
and I would say, like, don't just put things on leaders because it's a an exercise everybody has to do or a check the box. Like I found that it was when I was told I had to do something because it was required all the way down and there wasn't a thought of like, okay, this is required. We're going to have to do it. How can we best achieve it? Is there anything that I can do to help you? Like those conversations went a lot better versus like get to do this by 4 p.m. when it's like a
Mm,
survey to fill out for my team that like really probably isn't going to move the needle. And so I think some of it's just the way you approach, which goes back to
yeah.
connecting.
Awesome. Well, so I always say the number three is a grab bag. So what else would you like our audience to be thinking about doing from here?
Yeah. Well, I would say for me and how to connect with me, I don't have this like great website. I do have it. I just haven't published it yet. And so the best way to get a hold of me is LinkedIn.
Nice.
I love doing these podcasts. They're super fun. I love connecting with people. That's always great.
Nice.
My thing I prepared, Kent, was like connect, listen, invest, collaborate, and kindness. It's
Nice.
like my click
I
reference.
like it.
Um,
Perfect.
and I think if you do those 5 things, you're going to be great. And I don't think that there's one type of leader.
Right.
So there's a lot of different great leaders. I think you need to figure out who you are as a leader and bring that forward, and you'll be great. Some of my favorite books: Multipliers, Drive by
Mm,
Daniel Pink. And then I've got some stuff on LinkedIn, different posts and stuff that I like.
nice.
And I can send a bunch of resources if people want them, but
Perfect.
I would take advice too, Ken. So send me some good stuff to read or listen to
Love it.
other podcasts.
Awesome. Will do. Well, thank you. And I'll make sure we link to your LinkedIn page in the show notes and all that. So that brings us to the end of the episode. I think a lot of really useful stuff today, which I greatly appreciate. I never had a doubt in my mind. So thank you so much for coming today, Kristine. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Take it easy.